Today I will be reviewing Malleus by Dan Abnett. There will be spoilers in this review, but I also want to take a minute to talk about the covers for this book, the current cover, and the original. Like the covers of Xenos, the original cover of this book is so much better. One thing I want to know about the modern cover is, why is Gideon on this cover? When the fall of Thracian was happening, Gideon was injured and was nowhere near Eisenhorn during that event. This could be a different Inquisitor next to Eisenhorn, but it looks exactly like how Gideon is described and drawn in other art. Also, the cover on the left has things that actually happen in the story. There is Trubael and Eisenhorn and Cadian shock troopers. Even without the context of the story, the modern cover is kind of bad. It's just generic. The cover on the left has some style. It's unique. It looks like something that will catch your eye. There's a sense of action and an evil presence larger than life. Generic, but it works. The other cover has a grumpy guy looking off screen with another angry guy also looking off screen. It's just not interesting to look at. I mean, how do you go from this to this?
Oh, you must be grumpy.
Yeah.
It's a little disappointing that the modern cover took away the unique art style for a more realistic but bland sci-fi cover. I have no interest picking this book up over any other sci-fi or fantasy series, just like the last Eisenhorn cover. Anyway, let's talk about the story of Mallius. Following the events of the last book, Gregor Eisenhorn has continued his quest to vanquish cults of Xenos from the Imperium. We open on Gregor and his team fighting a cultist called Beldame. During this fight, a witchfinder named Tantalid of the Ordos Hereticus interferes and states that Gregor is a heretic for consorting with demons. I guess you could say Eisenhorn is being charged with a misdemeanor. How could Gregor get to this point? Probably from a succubus. Sorry, those jokes were bad as hell. After Eisenhorn escapes Tantalid, he returns to Thracian Primaris, where there is a parade for the end of the Ophidian campaign. Eisenhorn does not want to attend, but is forced to because he did play a role in the Ophidian campaign from the last book, mainly delaying it by revealing a mutiny among the War Master's own subsector. So Eisenhorn is forced to go to the parade with his superior, Lord Roken. The description of the parade on Thracian Primaris was also a lot of fun to read. The march of hundreds of thousands of soldiers gives you a sense of how massive and powerful the Imperium is. Gregor talks about how he feels like a small cog in the machine, which is what makes the events that happen immediately after so horrifying, because the great power of the Inquisition is attacked at its heart so viciously and suddenly. This attack releases all the prisoners of war and causes a massacre of the citizens and the returning veterans. The prisoners mainly consisted of alpha-level psychers, which have an immense destructive power, and their escape leads to the deaths of hundreds more innocents. The attack also cripples Eisenhorn's apprentice, Gideon Ravenor. Xenos' story was built on an investigation, and Malleus is about a hunt. Eisenhorn is hunting down those responsible for the massacre on Thracian Primaris, while also hunting down the demon prince Trubael from the first book. And the Inquisition itself is hunting Eisenhorn for his possible involvement with Trubael. Because of the destruction that has occurred on the Inquisition's homeworld and to his friends, Gregor is acting out of vengeance. He wants to see those responsible for the fall of Primaris punished. And throughout the story, he becomes more desperate to find ways to eliminate these threats. He begins to creep closer to using more blunt and radical tactics. At first, he sticks by the book. He follows orders and helps eliminate the rogue psychers with Inquisitor Haldane, and then works undercover to try and find an Inquisitor that may have been involved with the massacre. Once Gregor is accused of working with demons and heretics, he must use any means necessary to acquire the resources he needs to clear his name and destroy the enemy responsible. Eisenhorn's loyalty isn't just questioned by the Inquisition, but at times his own team, although mainly just Fischig. Trubael also becomes the first real threatening villain of the series because he is a force of nature, rather than a grunt that can be shot through the face with a bolt gun. Nothing Eisenhorn throws at this enemy can stop it or kill it, which makes it an intimidating enemy when it appears in the book. There is some cliche stuff with Trubael, like when he tells Gregor their destinies are entwined and he's not gonna kill him just yet, even though he has the perfect chance to, because they're not so different from each other.
Hermano, you and me, we not so different.
There is a valid reason for Trubael not flat out killing Eisenhorn, and that's because Trubael believes Gregor will create a rune staff powerful enough to destroy Trubael's physical enslaved form. What doesn't make sense is Trubael supposedly is being controlled by someone to carry out their plan. Except Trubael has enough free will to choose who he needs to kill to complete that plan, who he needs to kill and let live so his own plans can go into effect. I would think the villain would want to kill Eisenhorn as fast as possible, especially since letting Eisenhorn live ruined his plans from the first book. But apparently Trubael has enough free will to let Gregor live and carry out a plan that directly goes against his master's plan, and it's very convenient that there are enough loopholes for Trubael to allow Gregor to live to destroy the main villain's master plan. What is also convenient is the other powerful demon host doesn't want to kill Gregor for whatever reason. We're left to assume that it's part of their master's plan, but it doesn't make sense why their master would want to frame Gregor. It just seems, with the number of chances they have to kill Gregor as opposed to frame him for something, and how big of a pain Gregor has been in their side, that Trubael and Profanity's master would order them to kill Gregor instead of let him live. It's also convenient that Trubael knew when Gregor made the rune staff, he would only kill Profanity's spiritual and physical form and free Trubael instead of destroy Trubael's physical and spiritual form and accidentally free Profanity. So either Trubael is just insanely lucky, or he's a mastermind on the same level as the Chaos Gods. I think Malleus does benefit from having a central enemy like Trubael instead of hundreds of side villains like the Glaw family. Trubael gives the reader someone to fear and to place the blame of Gregor's persecution from the Inquisition. He's the enemy that injured Eisenhorn's apprentice, and he leads Eisenhorn to question his own Puritan beliefs. Instead of fighting the Glaws, Locke, Pontius, Mandragore, there is a central villain that is enforcing an evil plan that Gregor must use any means possible to stop. Every time Trubael appears, he laughs and taunts Eisenhorn and begins to chip away at his confidence and has Gregor question his own actions. It leads to Eisenhorn and Fischig making a promise that if Eisenhorn does anything to please the powers of chaos, Fischig will shoot Eisenhorn. Aside from Gregor, the characters that get to shine in this book are Fischig and Pontius Glaw. Fischig gets some great time with Eisenhorn to build up their relationship. In the first book, it felt like Fischig was almost intruding on the investigation, and he slowly became someone that Eisenhorn could trust. Here, he is an old friend that will check Gregor if he begins to step out of line. Fischig believes in following the rules and going by the book. He believes Gregor is also going to put the good of the Imperium before anything else. But like what was mentioned previously, his loyalty is not infinite. We get to visit Pontius Glaw, the most interesting villain of the first book, and again he steals the show as we learn more about his backstory. Pontius revels in Eisenhorn's desperation to find a way to defeat Trubael. Eisenhorn is forced to rely on chaos to fight chaos. He must use heresy to defeat it, which is exactly what he feared he would use the Necro Touch for. This relationship with Pontius is what made him an interesting villain in the first book, and I'm very glad he made a return here. Eisenhorn also talks about how he loves Elizabeth, but how they can't be together because he can't touch her. He's a psychic and she's a blunt, which means it's physically painful to be around her, let alone touch her. This is a relationship I don't really buy. We don't really get any interaction between Eisenhorn and Elizabeth, and Elizabeth isn't even in most of this book, aside from when Eisenhorn wants to talk about that he secretly loves her. Medea Betancourt is a character introduced in Malleus. Medea gets as much development as her father, which means she does nothing besides act as Eisenhorn's pilot. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I don't know why Midas was killed in between books, because Medea serves no purpose to the story, and her character could easily have been replaced with her father. I personally think it might have been because Midas, Nail, and Fischig are all basically the same character. They're all gruff, tough guys that are loyal to Eisenhorn. With Medea being a daughter of a character from the first book that died, Eisenhorn can be kind of a mentor to her, but even that side of their relationship isn't touched upon until the third book. I'm not mad Midas was killed, it just doesn't play any role in this story until the third book, which also means Medea doesn't get to explore anything about her father's death until then. Gideon is a great character in his own series, but here he does nothing. It felt pointless to have Gideon in this story or mention him at all. Eisenhorn mentions multiple times how he wants to make sure that those that crippled Gideon are brought to justice, but it feels hollow because we barely spent any time with Gideon. We don't know anything about Gideon besides his promising career, so the motivation that Eisenhorn has to avenge Gideon doesn't mean much to me. There isn't a payoff for avenging Gideon because by the end of the book, we know he's recovered, at least enough to be sending gifts to Eisenhorn for his final battle against the main villain. The fact that Gideon wasn't in critical condition should have been held off until the end of the book, because it would have been more impactful. When we find out Gideon is okay, it's kind of anticlimactic. My favorite fight in this series is probably when Akkadian shock trooper has his gun malfunction and decides to body slam a demon prince. After Eisenhorn's fight with Profane Needy on Cadia, the Inquisition is attempting to hunt down Eisenhorn because they believe he is working with Chaos. Eisenhorn then goes on the run and begins to become desperate to find ways to clear his name. There's a paragraph describing Eisenhorn and his team feeling guilty about fighting Inquisitors and Arbiters that are hunting them. Eisenhorn says he will always be haunted by those necessary deaths. But the next paragraph starts by saying, between those escapades, are you haunted by these deaths? Or are they a wacky adventure? Why would you use that word? Just to show some contrast, there's a short story at the beginning of the book called Missing in Action. There is a well-done scene where Eisenhorn meets soldiers that are so traumatized during their time at war, they begin to believe all the citizens are chaos worshippers, and they begin killing them in the middle of the night. Eisenhorn reaches out to them and tries to get them to stand down and surrender. I believe Eisenhorn doesn't want to kill these people because he's trying to talk to them and he's trying desperately to get them to come peacefully. In Malleus, I don't think Eisenhorn feels bad at all about killing these people because he simply says, I kind of feel bad about those deaths. In Missing in Action, he puts down his gun, he goes over to talk to them, they begin crying. Here, he just kills them and says, oh yeah, I kind of feel bad about that. I don't buy it, and I don't really feel that it was impactful because he just says he feels bad and it never comes up again in this book or the next book. At one point, the story feels like it goes on a side quest. There's this fight with a giant worm inside a planet's core. It didn't really make much sense, and I feel like a lot of it could have been cut out, and time could have been given to prepare for the final fight in the story. There are also some continuity errors. There are a couple times where Eisenhorn says that he smiles, but at the end of the last book, he mentions how no surgery or healing could ever heal the nerves in his face from the torture he received at the hands of Gorgon Locke. Maybe this means Eisenhorn feels like smiling, but it seems like it's an error that wasn't edited out of the book. Now we have to talk about the worst part of this book, which is the ending. This has got to be the weakest ending of almost any book I've ever read. About halfway through, we figure out who is pulling the strings of the demon prince Trubael. The villain turns out to be a former hero and inquisitor named Kioxus. Instead of learning about this legendary enemy, we go on a side quest to fight a giant worm and build a magic sword and staff. Then we fight Witchfinder Tantalid again, and then we have a meeting with a group of inquisitors, and then, with 10 pages left, we find Kioxus' secret hideout and wipe out his entire force. At first I thought we were setting Kioxus up for the next book, which I would have enjoyed, but instead the villain that controlled the demon prince and was possibly going to destroy the warp and chaos itself only gets 2 pages of appearing in this novel. We get one line for why he's doing this, one line with him saying, Gregor is the real heretic, and Gregor says, I know you are, but what am I? And he kills Kioxus, who turns into dust. Kioxus was controlling Trubael, who was an entity that was haunting Gregor's dreams from the first book, and even caused the Inquisition to believe Gregor is a heretic. Kioxus had such an impact on Gregor's life, and when he shows up in the story for the first time, he is killed in 2 pages. It felt incredibly rushed, almost like Dan Abnett just gave up writing the story. The only thing that can explain how rushed this ending is would be if Dan Abnett's publisher put a gun to his head and told him to meet a deadline or something. Why not save Kioxus for the next book? This was rushed and awful. The 3rd book even starts off with killing a villain only meant to kick off the events of the story. Why not have Midas in this book, have Kioxus kill him? Eisenhorn can stop and foil Kioxus' plans. Kioxus has to go into hiding. Then at the start of the 3rd book, we find Kioxus. Eisenhorn goes on a vendetta with Medea, and they kill Kioxus together. And it also kicks off the events of Hereticus. It would have been so interesting to see a well-respected, legendary member of the Inquisition question Eisenhorn's beliefs. Make him question if what he is doing is right. It could be like how Pontius had a discussion with Eisenhorn about crossing the line. Eisenhorn could see it happening, and see it in himself. But no, Eisenhorn slashes Kioxus with a magic sword, and the story is resolved. Eisenhorn is also reinstated as an Inquisitor in like a sentence. That wouldn't have been interesting to find how an Inquisitor redeems himself and clears his name and goes through all of that political intrigue. No, it just happened. It just happened, and he says, "Oh, no one apologized. Now everything's okay. Everything's A-okay." A massive manhunt. Eisenhorn killed an Inquisitor, but he just gets reinstated because I guess he was right. I guess he killed Kioxus. I don't know how he has any proof he did, because Kioxus kinda turned into dust. He turned into dust. It says it right there. He turned it. How would they have proof? How would they have proof of this? They believe Eisenhorn is the one carrying out this plan, and then Kioxus and all his demons disappear. How do they have proof of this? I guess a couple of the Inquisitors help him on this journey, but Inquisitor Volk dies and a couple of others die, so I guess maybe a few of them survived, and they must have seen Kioxus, which is pretty convenient that they saw him before Eisenhorn killed him. But whatever, I guess Eisenhorn just gets reinstated, and whoopsie daisy, sorry, we thought you were responsible for a genocide on our home planet. Whoops. It's all wrapped up so fast. It's like the final manuscript had 100 extra pages, and then Mr. Magoo took them, threw them into a wood chipper, and Dan Abnett had 2 minutes to finish up the entire story and then ship it off to be printed. Eisenhorn speedrunned through fighting one of the greatest threats to the Inquisition and also reinstating his title. And the fight that was building up to since the end of the 1st book was finished in the blink of an eye. It wasn't satisfying at all. I only recommend this book because Hereticus is so good. Hereticus is amazing, and I can't wait to talk about it in my next video. But the only reason anyone should read Malleus is because there are a couple good scenes with Thracian Primaris, a couple good interactions between Eisenhorn, Fischig, and Pontius Glah, and you need to read Malleus to kind of understand some things that happen in Hereticus. But this book, it could have been so good. If it had stuck the landing, this book would be a 7 or an 8 out of 10. Instead, I have to give it a 4 out of 10. The first 2/3 were just so good. It was so unsatisfying and disappointing. I still think it's worth reading, but I am just very bitter with that ending. And I still recommend Malleus, only because Hereticus is so good, and I can't wait to talk about it. But Malleus is definitely, without a doubt, the worst book in the Eisenhorn series. Thank you for watching.